Hi, and welcome to our webinar today, where we are talking about data and the DMS foundations of the future. I am your host, Caroline Hill. I'm the editor of Legal IT Insider, and I have a guest today here that many of you will be very familiar with. So Paul Walker is Global Solutions Director at iManage and was previously a mere technical director at iManage. He's been with the company through all of its stages of life, from interwoven to autonomy to HP. And many years ago, before moving vendor side, he was a knowledge management development manager at Slaughter and May. Hi, Paul.
Hello, Caroline. Thank you for having me today.
Thanks for joining me. Did I put too many managers in that? Knowledge management development manager.
I don't know. I began to feel very old as you're reading out my history.
Must admit, it was only recently I realised that you've been at Slaughter and May.
Yes, a good 10 years that.
I know, a long time ago. So thanks for joining me. So we've got an amazing topic today, talking about it's very basic form data. So we're going to be it's a very wide-ranging conversation. It's a huge topic. Obviously, it underlies every conversation and project around AI. Everyone's looking how to leverage their data, and we're going to be talking about where the legal market sits and where law firms sit in that journey, and some of the challenges that they're facing in terms of cleaning up their data, what that even means. So I have a habit of talking about cleaning up data. You're going to help me unpick what's actually happening and what firms are doing. We're going to look at some of the work that iManage is doing with law firms, both in helping them to sort of truly interrogate their data, and in your services as well that you're developing. We're going to be looking at the way that iManage is working with others, sort of a move perhaps towards interoperability, which we'll be discussing. And we'll be going on, perhaps concluding, talking about semantic search, which obviously a super hot topic. So stick around with us. We've got a packed conversation. But Paul, talk to me, there's a sort of perception of that the legal market is perhaps lagging compared to others. If I were to ask you to preface this conversation, what would you say?
A couple of things actually, Caroline. So I mean, listening to your introduction there, you framed it as a challenge, and we see data as a challenge. It is definitely a challenge, but I do like to kind of repurpose that and return that on its head as an opportunity. There's opportunity in that data. It's not just, we're not just doing this for fun. We're not trying to identify those nuggets of data for fun. We're doing it because there's opportunity in that data. And that's ultimately the business justification for this. Not doing it for the hell of it. We need to identify the good quality stuff and leverage it across our businesses, help law firms to deliver better services to their clients by finding this really useful data and turning it into something useful. So I'd like to kind of spin it into that opportunity.
To be fair, actually, you're quite right, and I do have a habit of talking more about the challenges. And actually, what I should have said is we will conclude with some of the opportunities and some of the more positive stuff. So I think perhaps I'm having conversations with IT directors, and we are perhaps focusing on challenges, but you're absolutely right. And one of the cool things we're going to do at the end is look at some of the perhaps cool ways that people are using it and those opportunities. I couldn't agree more. Like, it's a bit cliche to talk about data as oil, but I think that there's an element of truth in that.
It's a mountain, and there's gold in that mountain. Just like the oil analogy. Let's use some other analogies.
Should we have a competition? Should have perhaps kept this one secret.
Please do post any other analogies in the chat while we go for the data analogy.
Yeah. So as we go, like in the chat, so this is interactive, and as we go, if the points we touch on that resonate with you, please share your own experiences. I do sometimes joke that these are group therapy sessions, but they're super important conversations, and it should be really great to hear your experiences, whatever they may be. So where does the market sit? So it's tempting sometimes, not just with this conversation, but with many, to talk about the legal sector as the laggard. You work with law firms, you work with corporate legal, so you get to see a lot of different sectors. So where would your assessment be as to where legal sits?
Yeah, it's always interesting. As you say, I have worked with a lot of legal teams, whether they be corporate legals, law firms, over my career, but I've also worked in accountancy organizations, the big four, etc. And I've actually also worked in a lot of the sort of big telecoms companies and the big banks over my career and stuff. And again, legal is very much seen, as you say, as a laggard. And we specifically see that, I think, when people move from one of those industries and they move into the senior tech position in a law firm, they often go, what is these kind of strange working processes, and these, their adoption of tech is appalling. In the telecoms company, we're very high tech and we're leveraging all our data and our big data lakes, etc. And that's true, 100% true. But I think what is missing from that discussion and that argument is really the technology that was available to law firms to make them not laggards really wasn't applicable. If you look at what a law firm does, it's trying to understand language, it's trying to apply language, and it enshrines that within content documents, and those documents come formalized agreements, etc. And a lot of the things they're doing is around language, and really the technology of understanding language, the nuance of language, really didn't exist in a way that law firms could truly leverage their data. They don't work in the structured data world where databases and information like that. They work in the unstructured data world where the answer to questions inside this format, the Word document, the PDF, a collection of files, etc. And they're trying to understand what that is. And they're trying to repurpose it. They're trying to reuse it. They're trying to apply it to new problems and new challenges. And so it's that piece that I think it's a little bit short-sighted to just say they were laggard. They didn't have the tech platforms that really could help them in the problems that they needed to address. And AI, the biggest thing about AI, and the reason that legal tech in particular is seen as one of the big beneficiaries, is AI's ability to understand the unstructured language form, and that's part of what lawyers do in the legal business. So I think that's partial justification with someone who spent 20 years in legal tech, but I think understanding that problem opens up many different opportunities.
Yeah, I agree. And going back to your point about why it's exciting, that's again why this is super exciting. I think that I haven't done this as long as you in terms of the legal. I feel like very old, but the tech, and there's been many times when people talk about exponential change, but we really are there. So I think it's super exciting. So in terms of the steps that people are taking to get their data into shape. So I know you've talked about, I talk about cleaning up data, there's more to it than that. You have, again, just wanted to draw, we're going to do some deep dives, but I just, at a high level, I wanted to take advantage of your spectrum of working with lots of firms and the industry as a whole. So where would you say, what would you say the steps are that people are taking to clean up their data?
I think that, it is a very diverse sets of kind of almost maturity that we see out there in our customer base in particular. But people are ultimately trying to understand, where is their data? Where is their good data? And it's not always as simple as it's in this system, or it's in this system, or it's in this system, because often it's hidden inside those systems, inside and in amongst other data. Again, it's the mountain with the gold mine, the seam of gold that runs through it. There's a mountain of bad data, and in amongst it, there's some good data, and that's what they're trying to identify. So they're trying to find out where it is. And there's a number of techniques, which I'll come on to in terms of how they can identify where it is. They're then trying to work out, can we trust this? And trust, again, is something that kind of evolves over time. It's not a done and dusted. A piece of data, a document can be true today, but tomorrow it can be false, as in regulations change, law changes, situations, the world changes. That's always going to happen. And as those things change, that piece of information that you had can change. And so understanding the timeline and the life cycle of this information, this data, is never ever more important than it is today. The idea of actually cleaning up, Caroline, and getting rid of data that's no longer relevant, no longer needed, is never ever more important, because it has the power to mislead. It has the power to confuse and introduce risk into a process like an AI agent, or even a human in the loop kind of AI review. It has that risk embedded in it. And if you can get rid of the data in a timely fashion, even if you get rid of, just go and park it somewhere else so that it's out of sight, then it helps manage some of the risk. So they're trying to identify where it is, can they trust it? They're trying to identify, can they govern it? So it's all great and well that we've now found it, we trust it, but we need to govern it. We need to make sure that only the right people can see that and should have access to it. Make sure that it's trusted and understood by the right people, not everyone within our businesses. And then trying to work out, how do we Once we've identified it, gone through these steps, how do we open it up to the different tools and services that we need to use against that data? In an iManage sense, and again, I think we're going to come onto this in a bit more detail. We see very much our part in this world as it kind of multifaceted. We are a data platform ultimately, and we need to enable customers to use whatever tools they need to come in and leverage that data. Not all about the tools that we provide. There are many, many hundreds of tools out there that our customers utilize and need to utilize for lots of different reasons. We need to kind of open up the access while still governing and securing and data, and enable that access. The other thing I'd just quickly say as well is, and I'm going to go a little bit iManage here, so apologies. In an iManage world, often we talk about, the title of the webinar is a DMS. And really what we're talking about there is a data platform. Why have we done all this for 2 decades? Why have customers take emails and documents and put them into these matter files? Why have they done that? They've done it for records keeping, good records. What did we say on this matter? How did we get to this decision? What was the negotiation process? What was the drafting flow, etc.? But ultimately, what they've also been doing throughout that entire period is giving context to the data. They haven't always realized it, but when they put something in a matter file, we now know the client that it relates to, the matter relates to, the matter partner maybe that was working on, the matter type, the jurisdiction, etc. Maybe the life cycle of this data is also implied by the matter life cycle. So actually, they've been giving it context, and context is what helps us downstream when we want to start. The more we understand about it, the greater the context. And AI is just one of the greatest, newest ways of applying ever more context to that data, but it still needs more context to be able to get to the good and trusted and right answer. Long-winded answer there.
No, great answer. Because what some of the work, when I use the word cleanup, but I know that a lot of firms, sort of extending what you said, they're building collections, and to also bring that to an iManage level, some of the work that you're doing with Insight Plus, and I know there's been extensive work being done for many years on that. In order to, one of the fears I talk to lots of people about, we're going to come on later to talk about semantic search and what the DMS, how you can use it. And obviously there's these big fears about, there has been the work behind the scenes in terms of context, but as you said, there's so much information in this. It's a case of, obviously it's pretty obvious that how do you make sure that the right information is being surfaced? This is obviously top of mind for everybody, like if you start to leverage AI to a fairly full extent, how do you ensure that you're maintaining the quality that firms have worked so hard on for years and years and years? And I know that this is, it's something that perhaps slows down progress in the area. So maybe you could talk about the work, and you'll feel free to talk about Insight Plus. You are from iManage, but just maybe just generally about the work people are doing with collections in terms of what that means and why it's important, and then also within the context of Insight Plus.
Yeah, so collections is an interesting kind of term, because collections, I think, means something different to the individual. Each individual in the firm has a different idea of a collection. Collection can be very personal. A collection could be it's what we used to do when we had access to our C drives. You'd build a little collection of data, right? You'd have a folder system, you put your documents in that folder system. You're creating collections, ultimately. You're taxonomizing, classifying that data. Collections are just different ways that we can contextualize the data, the documents, the content. We put kind of wrappers around them, and then when we've built those collections, we can use them for things. And the ways we've got kind of there are many different approaches to how you would identify a collection within a law firm or a corporate legal organization. I will say it's a little bit simpler than corporate legal, and I'll touch on that. But in a law firm, one of the strong ways that you can build a collection is look at the process by which the legal process that your fee earners are working through. And at some point during the stages of a transaction, there are certain things that happen that make certain pieces of content more important than others and more important to the future. At the close of a transaction, you're typically doing something like an e-signature, sending a set of documents out for signature. At that point, when they all come signed, we all know they're the final documents. And often what lawyers want to know when they're just about to start a new transaction is, what did we do before? What are the previous examples of this? And they want the final product. Sometimes there's use cases where lawyers want to see the progression. How do we get to that final decision? So we're not saying that's not important. But actually looking at the final product is often what they want. The deal sets, the deal Bibles, the final signed content. So looking at that process, you are then able to kind of go, it's the final set, effectively flag it. So now we know where all your final documents are across your 100 million documents and emails. And that becomes a perfect kind of grounding data set for Insight Plus to consume and surface up. And then what we're doing with the Insight Plus world, again, we're kind of we're integrating into customers' data lakes. And again, very many law firms have built these data lakes, and they're ingesting huge volumes of data from the practice management systems, from their time billing systems, etc., into these data lakes. And it gives them all a contextual view of the client, the matters, the fee earners, etc. And we're taking that data and then we're applying that in the Insight Plus world across their unstructured data. So you want an example of a service agreement that you did in oil and gas in Kazakhstan in the last 2 years. You can quickly laser into that grouping, that collection of data, and then you can start using AI in that collection. Then you can start asking questions, and you're asking it against oil and gas services agreements for Kazakhstan. So you're in the right place. Whereas if you go kind of just broad brush and hope for the best, you get all sorts of kind of noise coming into the responses. So Insight Plus is a kind of key part of that. One other thing I'll just touch on is, and it kind of goes hand in hand with both Insight Plus and the core platform. One other thing that we've been very heavily working on is our AI enrichment engine. And that's basically an engine that sits inside the core iManage work platform. And it reads documents as they come in. So as you're just working on a document, it's reading that and it's telling us what it is. It's trying to understand, without the human having to tell us, what type of legal agreement is this? And then if we know what type of legal agreement is, what other piece of information would we typically expect in this type of agreement? So grab the parties, the governing law, maybe the execution dates, etc., maybe some financial values. Again, that's all just grabbing that context. Once we've got that context, we surface it up to Insight Plus so that then all the AI can, again, contextualize. And I know it's, again, long answer. This then becomes incredibly useful to our partners, our tech partners, the likes of the Harveys and the Lagoras of the world, because they struggle to build technology that comes in and crawls across huge volumes of data. Because how do they sift and know what's important? If we can have sorted out that for them and say this is the most important stuff for this use case, they can go straight to that, and it makes their technology much better. Straight away, the questions that get asked in their applications and the answers it provides go, the quality goes through the roof because we're asking the right set of data at the right time.
Yeah, this is the just to talk terminology. So obviously, iManage AI that you launched in 23 in terms of auto classification.
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah, which was, given how bad people are, has been, something of I'm very hesitant to use the word game changing, but and so it's a bit in terms of actually being able to classify documents, especially at a high volume. It's been not just file management, but it's a bit of a game changer.
Yeah, and it's the legacy, right? It's going forward. It's very easy to kind of address some of these problems with new data that's coming to the platform. It's relatively easy. The big challenge is, what do we do with the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years of data that many organizations are sat on? And again, there is value in that data. There's huge potential in that data. How can we identify it and leverage that?
Do you think there's what do you say to people? That I get a lot of conversations around, we used to have to work really hard around metadata. It's been a terminal issue in really being able to interrogate your data, and a lot of people, we have a very techie audience, so I don't mean to be patronizing or sort of insinuate anything. And actually, most people know much more about tech than me. But there's an assumption that AI will fix everything now. That we will no longer have to do the work. Is that something that you bat into a lot, or not really?
It is something. It is, and actually, we see different cultural impact in versions of that. Shall we say? I think specifically in Europe, there's a culture of classification. It's ingrained in many of the law firms across Europe. There's culture. I don't know why that has happened historically, but there is a culture of good classification. We were in Europe, we were a standard for matter centricity, way quicker than the American market. The American market was still quite laggard in some respects. Laggard, again, is a dangerous term, but a lot of the US firms went for the whole kind of big bucket approach. and hoping that the tools would kind of find the answer. I think the answer is the mid ground, right? You've got to make the tools smart enough to give the user, the human in the loop, the information. But often it still takes that human to go, yes. We just got to make it simpler and simpler and simpler for them to say yes, and to also say no, so that the engine learns from that behavior. And again, that's built into our classification capability. So when people start saying, no, it's got it wrong, it doesn't send us the document, but we start knowing that the model is not behaving. And what do you get on ChatGPT? You know, when they're testing a new model, you get those two side-by-side comparisons of the response. That's what ChatGPT are doing. They're teaching the engine, this is a better one than this one. You need to learn that this answer is better. And that's just as true in document classification as in any kind of metadata discussion.
Yeah, by all means, jump in, anybody, with your experiences and your suggestions. And I'm not, and by the way, what I just said, wasn't suggesting that nothing's changed in terms of GenAI in terms of the way its capability of searching. That wasn't what I was suggesting. So I do want to. There's so much to talk about, but let's just have a bit of fun. Let's talk about some AI projects gone wrong. We are going to come on to talk about the joys of AI and the successes. But what I hear particularly from consultants is that firms, there's been a big growth curve and so much learning, but firms have kind of jumped in, not done the hard yards perhaps on the data, and have introduced AI, have sort of entered into AI projects that have ultimately hit the buffers because they can't take it any further for various different reasons. So I know we're going to come on to talk a bit about Wayfinder, but you actually introduced a services element, I think, in sort of from seeing this. But talk me through. I think it'd be super helpful to talk about what you've seen go wrong, and to the extent that you can, without, I'm not asking you to name them names.
Yeah, there's a long path of wrong is maybe not this always the right word, but sometimes it's just lessons learned, I think, from some of these projects. I think there's a couple of things I'd say. I think we're in the kind of, as we look at kind of growth, the hype curve, so to speak, of AI, in particular, or Gen AI. I think we're now in that adoption phase, which is great tech, great ideas, but how do we get people to actually use it and benefit from it? I think that's what we're seeing a lot of the AI vendors now pivot to. The capabilities there. We gave you the capability, but we didn't necessarily give it you in the right place. So where do you work and how do you work on a daily basis? Because that's where the tooling needs to be in that flow for you to use it. It's got to be kind of, I hate to use the Microsoft Clippy example, but it's got to be a little bit Clippy-like, because it's got to tell you it's there and remind you. It's got to be that annoying little assistant going, "Have you got any work for me today? Have you got any work for me today?" It's got to. We have got to get into that point where people, it's part of their workflow. They forget that it's AI. It's just AI doing something that they used to do manually that's now doing on their behalf, and they haven't even realized. The thought of AI needs to almost disappear. They just need to click some buttons and things happen, and they get the puts and they get the outputs. And I think that's where a lot of the tech vendors are moving to. I think the likes of Legore and Harvey are moving heavily, as far as I see, into kind of the workflow and the agentic aspect. So how do we get it, not just to give us an answer to a question, but how do we get it to actually take on the next steps and the next actions and do things that are more useful? Because as soon as it's part of those multiple steps, it becomes more useful. So I think there's a big push from the vendors on adoption. That's a major focus. And there's a big push from the clients. Again, I think they've bought and spent a lot of money on AI for good reason. They haven't necessarily seen the gains yet from that. They've got some good answers and good responses. But the big push, I think, is we need to get everyone realizing the power of these tools and what they can be used for and how to use them. So I think that's kind of where we are. And I guess it's not a disaster story, but in some cases it is a disaster story because people have spent a lot of money and the tools aren't being used. I think the other one is when we look at AI, and AI means many different things, right? It has many different capabilities. There's AI assistance, there's AI powered search. And when we look at things like AI powered search, where we have seen particular problems, and we saw this a bit with Copilot, not so much in the law firm sector, but definitely in the enterprise world, the more corporate world. We saw a litany of disasters where people turned it on. They had uncontrolled environments where all their content was living, and people started finding stuff. You've just given them a great new superpower to go and find stuff. What happens when you find stuff? You find stuff that you shouldn't be finding. And I'm old enough, sadly, to remember back to that point in the sort of early 2000s when enterprise search was big. I was part of Autonomy, an enterprise search vendor, many other enterprise search vendors on the market. And there was a rush from industries to go in and deploy enterprise search. Let's unify all our repositories into one interface. Great idea. The problem is he started finding stuff. And there was also what came quite often as a result of enterprise search. There was a lot of CIOs who lost their jobs because suddenly all these problems were found. Content suddenly fell into the open. It was always in the open, but people, through obscurity couldn't find that content. Now they can suddenly find it. And now we've just gone to the next generation of uber powerful search. And again, people need to be really, really careful about kind of benchmarking it, especially when they turn on these search capabilities about what is it we have in our repositories, how are people finding it, who should be seeing that. So the security element of this becomes vital as well. And again, that comes from good information architecture, understanding your data, where it is and how to secure it and who should be seeing it. So I think that's kind of the lessons learned as I see it.
Yeah. Yes. So from a vendor perspective, it's that usability and not having to do the multi-clicks, the toggling between different interfaces, which never works, let's face it. So it's that delivering it at the point of need. And then for firms, anything that I think anything where you just expect people to use it. It's almost like I was having a conversation with an IT director who was saying, it's almost like we've forgotten the first principles of tech, which is, and it's all around adoption, and it's around, you can't, even though, there's a lot more engagement and excitement, you can't just give them Copilot, for example, and then expect them to suddenly be using it every day as part of their, or whatever it might be, that actually there's still the basic principles of they need to be shown. I mean, this isn't really, that doesn't come down to data. That's not a data problem, I suppose. But yeah, nonetheless,
it does kind of lead into the same things. If you're kind of teaching people how to do things as you want them done in the first place, it puts actually the data in the right place, so you don't create this problem down the line of security and information spools. I remember when I first joined.
The governance point, yeah. I mean, yeah. The horrors, and actually that acts as a big deterrent, as it don't need to tell you that law firms are cautious, and they would, there obviously are mistakes, and some are faster adopters than others, but actually it acts as a huge deterrent. The fear of that happening, I think, more than not.
I mean, I remember my first kind of couple of weeks at Slaughter May a long time ago, but that was join, and I think it was a month of training, in the classrooms, and it wasn't just like us in the tech department, it's lawyers and partners also in those training rooms, getting told not just what is the tech, why is the tech, but also what is the expectation from the organization in terms of the data and the management of that data inside the tech. I never kind of forgot those principles, if I'm honest. It kind of became ingrained in my head. I do remember one of the partners lifting up a mouse and waving it in the air, not quite knowing what to do with the mouse, but I don't know if that dates me a little bit too old, but it was a good solid ground. I remember going to one of the accounts, big four accountancies, and I was in a room, and there was a lawyer who was formerly at Slaughter May, and she also recalled, she was slightly younger than me, but she also recalled that first kind of training and the kind of the rules that are put in place for the rest of her career in terms of kind of good order and good practice and how to be managing this data. And I think there was a professional kind of assertion also put of that. This is part of your professional duty, to manage this data in a good and healthy way, both for the organization, but also for the clients that you serve ultimately as well.
Yeah. And we're going to come on to talk about some of that in terms of the work you're doing with Purview, which we've still got time to do. Just briefly, in terms of helping people, I was interested to chat to Neil Arajo about Wayfinder. So that, and I know that's partly, I already mentioned it, it's in response to people's, seeing these AI projects perhaps hit the buffers. Is that right to start with? And it's interesting in this journey of, we will come back to heavily dive back into data, but I am interested in this concept of, as a SaaS software company, it's a challenge to know how much down the services route you go. But I think it's interesting to see iManage and actually others moving into services. And I suppose that's to sort of start learning from customers, and also try and prevent them hitting those buffers, I suppose.
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. So the Wayfinder program is effectively, it's an enablement and adoption program that comes with the AI tools. So yes, we have AI capabilities built into the platform, and yes, customers can purchase those and turn them on, etc., and start leveraging them. But what we discovered very quickly, both from our own experiences, but also looking at the market, looking at things like Microsoft Copilot, etc., what we saw was this kind of massive peak at the start. Everyone wants to play with it. And then within 2 weeks, everyone's gone back to their day jobs, and it drops off a cliff because people have forgotten about the tooling and what it needs to do. And what we also saw when in the early days of Ask iManage, people were presented with a prompt, a box, a text box, and go ask whatever you like. And you wouldn't imagine, we film some of our users just as kind of, we do this regularly with some of our interfaces as we build them to kind of see their reactions. And the inertia was incredible. People just sat there kind of like a rabbit in the headlights, looking at this box like, I don't know what to ask. What can I ask? They were looking, it's like, you ask anything. There's a document. What would you normally ask for that document? And this real inertia about what they would do with that. And so it very quickly became apparent to us that a number of things. So firstly, we had to kind of work with them to tell them the art of the possible, but also as you're doing that, you need to hear from them. Because as you start giving them ideas, they start coming up with ideas, and you need to be able to kind of almost mold that idea into something that will actually work for them. So that's where the Wayfinder program kind of came in. It's like, how can we show you some ideas? But then as you're coming up with the ideas yourselves, as you start thinking and you start getting used to the practice, how can we help you make sure the answer it's getting is correct for what you're trying to do? Now, what we've also learned as part of that program is any customers who have seen Ask iManage on the call, we're putting more and more into the application so the user doesn't ever have to think about a prompt. More and more, what users want is a button. They don't want to have to sit there typing. They don't like typing. No one likes typing. They want to hit a button and it does what they think it needs to do. And so more and more, as we learn these behaviors, we're able to take the common patterns that people are looking for and enshrine it in buttons, features and functions that they simply now click, and we make the buttons available at the right point in the process. So less and less do now people have to be prompt engineers. You might still have some prompt engineering skills and capability within the organization. And there was always, the need for people who want to go really deep into large document sets, etc., who really want to get into the prompting capability. But less and less from an average end user who's just trying to get a job done, doesn't want to learn prompting a whole new language. Yeah. We're trying to remove some of that need to kind of sit there and type away and try to give it different questions. One other point on that as well, Caroline. So one other thing we learned as part of that prompting was that on any given day, the same individual would ask the same question 10 different ways. And as they're asking those different questions, the engine is giving them slightly different answers. And then the questioning would come, why is it giving me a different answer? Well, it's because you've asked it slightly differently now. It's like a human being. If you've got an assistant, you ask them that question, what are they going to say? Summarize this. So you can say, summarize this, and they go away and they'll summarize it for you. You ask that same person the same, summarize this tomorrow, they're going to come up with a different answer to the one they did yesterday. So again, what we're trying to do is remove some of that uncertainty, some of that hallucination, some of that variance in the question and prompting capabilities that users.
Sorry.
No, so users don't have to think about it. So it just becomes automatic.
But that's a big trust thing, actually. The fear of the different answers. I think so. So that's quite key. You've mentioned a few times Copilot, Harvey, and the work that you're doing, or the connection between the platforms. I think so. Historically, I think it would be fair to say, you can tell me your perspective, and if you think I'm wrong, that there was a perception. And I think there has definitely been a perception that iManage was not an open platform. There wasn't a sort of that interoperability. Would you say that it's now? I know that we'll come on to talk about some of the work that you're doing with those different platforms. But what would you say about that perception? Is it wrong?
I think it's a little bit wrong, but it's not wrong, if you know what I mean. I think it's in the eye of the beholder, so to speak. I think the data has always been accessible. The APIs have always been there, but people's ability to leverage those APIs has always been the blocker. There's a technical barrier to being able to get to the data, and that's always been the problem. is, people don't always have access to tech resource to get to the data. And so over time, we've had to come up with new ways of getting access to the data so that you don't require a developer, or you don't require some custom code or some application to go and get to that data. So the platform's always been open. Now, again, when we look at our sort of history in the on-premises architecture, customers had ways into that data around the application. They could go into their kind of file systems behind it, and they could grab the files programmatically. So they didn't have to go through our APIs to do that. So in some ways, the perception of moving to cloud was, oh, now we can't go in the back door and grab the data. We have to go through the front door, and that's slightly more challenging. So, again, we are always been an open platform. I think we've always been, heavily, I won't say dependent, but friendly to our tech partners. I think probably we have the biggest tech partner ecosystem in the legal tech world, I'd say. There's, I think, 350 legal tech partners around about now. And why are they there? Because they address thousands of different needs and use cases of our customers that don't apply necessarily uniformly across our customer base, but they have different use cases. And they come in through the official door, through the security, through the API, in a governed way into the platform. But never more has it been more important to our customers to grow. Again, going back to our earlier statement about laggards and so on, before, their access to the data wasn't so crucial because they didn't have the tech to kind of really mine it and do stuff with it anyway. Now they've got this piece of tech in the world that can suddenly start understanding this data, and they're like, well, give me the data. And it's fair. It's absolutely fair. And that's what we're working so hard to make sure that the tech partners that we work with, our customers, can get access to this data in whatever way they desire.
Yeah, it's huge, that, and I've seen. So I mentioned Copilot, and you've talked publicly about some of the work that you're doing with Copilot. There's been recent announcements from Thomson Reuters and Harvey. So it is really positive to see you starting to work with those. And I know it's quite interesting because you talk about APIs, but so there's a piece of tech that Anthropic has built, Model Context Protocol, which I know has been used. Could you talk me through that? Perhaps I've thrown a lot of information at you there, but I just wanted to bring up MCP because this is obviously something which is super exciting. It will enable it creates a standardized protocol rather than having to create custom APIs. It creates a standardized protocol that no doubt, Paul, you can explain far better than I can, but it's kind of a bit of a sea change, isn't it? And explain maybe some of the work that you're doing and to what extent MCP is relevant or important to that.
Yeah, so MCP basically operates as, for not better, again, for those old enough, like an enterprise service bus. It's an API layer that enables LLMs to talk to data sources. And the data sources can be whatever you've basically spun up on these MCP services. One of those data sources could be iManage. One of those data sources could be your PMS, for example. So the MCP is basically a piece of technology that sits between the LLM and the data source, the data provider. And what it's able to do is basically, as questions get asked in the LLM, and it could be a ChatGPT for enterprise, it could be Claude from Google, it could be Microsoft Copilot. So most of the LLMs now support this, what's called this MCP protocol. But basically, when you ask questions in that interface that those AI engines provide, it's able to basically route the question logic through to the right service. And it does that through MCP. And then it starts talking to the underlying data source. And this is about, in some basic terms, it can be about search. So go and find me the data and then give me the data and make sense of it, because I'm going to work on that. But it can also kind of take actions. And again, this is where the agentic stuff gets quite interesting. So it's like, I don't know, go and find me all the recent motions to compel that we've written for this type of case. And now assimilate a brand new one for me and save that into the matter file for me. And it's able to not just kind of go grab the data. The AI can then process and provide the answer, the output, and then it's able to go, oh, next step, I need to now put that back into the DMS and put it into the right place so that for the future it's there. So it doesn't just cover query, so to speak, it can also take other actions. So it's a bit of a game changer at the moment, just because it provides this kind of universal way that everyone is allowing these two pieces of tech to talk to each other. Now, there's a couple of interesting posts on LinkedIn lately. So there's a Krista Wass. I don't know if he's probably not on this, but he's a head of legal ops for Rio Tinto. So Rio Tinto, a corporate legal customer of ours, they use iManage in their legal team. They've gone out and they've put their own MCP server in their place and they've connected it to the iManage cloud. And they're leveraging that, I think, with ChatGPT Enterprise, I think it was. He put a post up on, so it's public. I'm not betraying any confidences here. We're going to be talking to Chris hopefully next week to understand a little bit more of how they've done it, and because we're interested as well. We're doing our own research projects and working out how we can put MCP architecture into our platform so customers don't have to spin up these services themselves. So we're excited by this, and it offers us a lot of potential. Now, another interesting post on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago was can't remember the gentleman's name, but he posted around the fact that MCP would potentially remove the need for these kind of API integrations, the likes of which we have with, say, Harvey and Agora, etc. I don't believe that's true. It doesn't remove that need. It gives them some opportunity to leverage these common services in a particular way. But also in those integrations, there's quite often a little bit of logic inside those workflows and engines that those applications need, etc. So it doesn't do away with our APIs. It just becomes another route by which customers can get to their data in a more sort of uniform and common way. And the idea is that all the data sources in the world have MCP services, all the LLMs in the world can support MCP, and we're all talking through a common interface.
Super exciting. Super exciting. Yeah, I was looking at an article about that. Yeah, and it's at ChatGPT Enterprise. And he said their legal team can now query decades of institutional knowledge at scale using ChatGPT Enterprise connected to over 4.5 million documents in iManage, which is super exciting.
Yeah, I'm going to say one caution though, because it's not magic, right? So the question that comes in, our platform is still going to understand the question, and provide the right answer. So everything I said before.
Yeah, and I did put going back to the point, how do you know you're surfacing the right thing?
Exactly.
it's like my first thing was that, it's super exciting, but doesn't override all the things we just talked about.
Exactly. The data has still got to be in a good shape. It's got to be able to know how to get to the right answer within that collection of data. It's not magic. You can't just magically sift through and find the correct answer. So never important is that data architecture, that information architecture, still as important in that world as any other.
Yeah. Tell me, so just real quick on the Thomson Reuters Harvey, I feel like there's so much change now, and everyone wants to sort of maybe this doesn't even matter, that people want to be the hub. There's a sort of like, we are the hub, so Harvey's the hub, Thomson Reuters is the hub. I'm sure you'll say iManage is the hub. Does it matter? Like, I mean, the sands are shifting. It's interesting. There's a lot more interoperability. This for the end user, super exciting, particularly as you say, as we come on to what's the potential of agentic AI. But in terms of this sort of what the lie of the land looks like, how important is it, and what's your perspective?
I think there's been a dream for a long time, right, bringing the public and the private data together in a secure and governed way. And again, we're never ever closer than we are now. I still don't think we're there in reality. We have done, we did a lot of work with VLEX, with their Vincent AI, for example. And through Vincent AI, they're actually able to service up in a secure way the iManage data in the Vincent AI interface when you're asking questions against their public data sets, etc. So we are seeing kind of a merger of these data sets, but it has to be very, very safely governed. That all our security, all our governance. So we have to be very careful about where data moves around the world, where it's processed, etc. So all that still applies in terms of when we look at those partnerships and relationships. I think in terms of the hub, I don't honestly think anyone's got the claim to it. And I think anyone who claims it's probably wrong. The hub is where the user is and where they live, right? And the users, whether we agree or don't agree, they still live with Outlook, in Word, in Teams. And that's where they want the answers to these questions. And that's, to be honest, why people look to Copilot, I think, for a lot of answers. There's lots of good stuff that Copilot can do, but actually one of the fundamental things it does is it's built into those applications. so I don't have to route users into a web browser. It goes back to that adoption problem. The problem with having something running in the web browser is I have to remember it's over there to go and ask it a question. When actually I'm drafting a document, I want the question here and there. I'm drafting an email, I need the answers and questions as I'm doing that. So never ever more important that these AI capabilities somehow channel into the tools. Now, again, most of the vendors have plugins into Word, etc. But again, these spaces are becoming very crowded.
Yeah.
You know, how many plugins can you have in Word in the right in realistic terms? So again, I don't think anyone has the claim to the hub. I think Microsoft probably have the hub, and I think that's a fair statement from Microsoft if they were to claim it.
Yeah. So observation from someone in your in your organization, as we're seeing a lot of interesting building and making collections. It's just, I think this is an observation, but anyway, nonetheless, let's discuss. We're seeing a lot of interest in building and making collections and surfacing to different practice tools. Insight Plus helps. Are you doing a sales pitch, Alex? Helps that curation and collection and governance then surface to the right tools. So there's nothing wrong with selling shovels in a gold rush.
Yes. So we've got the mountain, we've got the seam of gold, and we're selling the shovels to find it. Yes.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that though? I mean, going back to that point.
I mean, I think, you know, me and Alex sing from the same hymn sheet. I work with Alex a lot, and you know, Alex is one of the, you know, he makes the claim of the hashtag IA before AI, which I think is never a truer statement. I think that's become very true for pretty much the entire industry now. Everyone is realizing the true value and the true challenge of AI is the data, and the true opportunity, the data.
Talk real quick about you were just talking about governance, and I did say we'd talk about the work that you're doing with Purview. I do want to come on real quick to semantic search as well. So perhaps we could do it simultaneously. So you know, we discussed the sort of the kind of I watch another analogy. The pot of gold at the end of the rainbow would be just type whatever you want. The true semantic search, you know, which I think we're getting closer to all the time. But obviously, with that, you know, perhaps we are repeating to a degree, but I think it's important to go back to the governance point. Which and we haven't talked about Purview, which I think is important for people to sort of perhaps for us to touch on about that. So perhaps talk to me first about how close we are to semantic search first, and then we'll talk about Purview, and then if there's time, we'll have a quick last positive story if there is one, you know, to finish up, to make sure that you realize that I'm not just talking about challenges, Paul.
So, I mean, we're there with semantic search, right? So, you know, from an iManage point of view, we have a semantic search engine. Currently today, we surface that up into the Insight Plus application. So it goes across those collections of data. Now that semantic search engine is what we call a hybrid index, because we're not doing away with the old way of searching. There are still times when a lawyer user needs to look for exact words within a set of content. They're not always just looking for that kind of fluffy logic. You know, when they're looking for that little fluffy animal that barks, sometimes they're looking for a dog and they haven't put dog in the explanation, but sometimes they're looking for the little fluffy animal that barks literally within some words. And so the end users need the ability to pivot between that kind of hard match and that more fluffy, wide open kind of search in essence. So that's why we very much still advocate for this hybrid search capability. And the ability, again, we see as we look at particular data sets and we run it across AI powered search. One thing we very quickly saw is one thing that AI seemed pretty weak at, and there may be a solution to this that we've not hit yet, but there's two things we see pop out. Firstly, jurisdiction. So understanding that this document applies to the laws of UK and England and Wales, for example, and that this one applies to California law, for example. We were having very big challenges because as soon as you start putting these data sets together, it starts the AI starts mangling laws together very quickly, and it can be very misleading from an end user. It can come up with a really convincing answer, but it's actually mangled laws from around the world together, and so it's very hard almost to get the AI to separate that what it's actually taking is good old information architecture, understanding that the content come in applies to particular jurisdiction or governing law, and almost marking that, so that then the user goes, I've got my answer, but now I want it specific to UK and Ireland. And it's able to do that within a click. It guides them, they put it, and then we regenerate the response and give them that in that context. So jurisdiction was one that kind of jumped out at us. The second one that jumped out of us was timelines. Timeline of activity across a set of content. Now, order of precedence, especially when you look at agreements and addendums, etc., that come out of those and follow up those. Understanding the structure and the timeline of those documents is massively important. And so when you've got this big repository of effectively unlinked data, it's really hard. The AI can't tell that this addendum, supersedes part of that master services agreement, for example. So again, we've had to look at how we can enable traditional old kind of metadata to help the user kind of understand that there is an order of precedence from the content. Here comes Alex again. Is he correcting me? So that's where we've seen some of the challenges of AI-powered search. But we have AI-powered search. It runs across the collections. I guess what we are working on now is how do we scale that up to what we call DMS scale? And again, we have to be very careful in iManage because we tend to sometimes worry about the bigger end of our customers, the customers who have 600, 700 million documents and emails in their repositories. But we have a lot of customers who have 1 million documents and emails in their repositories, and the problems are still there at the small end, but they're obviously amplified in the bigger end. So we're working at how to really scale that vector search, that semantic search, so that the answer and the quality doesn't go down because you're just providing it too much data, which is too untrustworthy. Imagine, again, think about what's inside our customers' repositories. It's not all their beautifully drafted agreements. There's third-party agreements, there's third-party content, there's emails, there's attachments of emails, there's e-discovery bundles and things like that. There's all manner of kind of content in there. Some of it's relevant, some of it's not, some of it's theirs, some of it's not. And trying to just trust in AI to find the answer amongst that is a big thing that we're very kind of focused on in terms of our efforts.
Talk about Alex made another observation. Anyone jump in, by the way. I'll just read the first bit. Our big demands in search on a daily basis remain things like Boolean logic and exact searches. Talk about Microsoft Purview. So I know that that's important in terms of being able to exclude data, highly sensitive data from AI. Talk through that.
There's a couple of things. I mean, there's a kind of a very kind of I won't say rudimentary, that's the wrong word, but there's something about Purview that we just have to do in the platform. That Purview, one feature of Purview is that it can encrypt content. So based on certain security policy, it encrypts that content. It means that search technologies, AI technology, effectively can't read that data. So it becomes kind of opaque. Now we can find it using metadata, all the stuff we know about the file on the outside, but we can't read the words inside the file. So we have a technical development it's hoping to release this year. That will basically crack those files open. Customers can basically configure the platform to crack it open. Crack is a bad word because it sounds like we're hacking into it. We're using official Microsoft APIs across the Purview service to open the file in a legitimate sense, provide the index, etc. It's not crack, it's not hack. So that's one thing that we just got to get done, and we're doing and we're working on. But the other aspect of this is kind of where you're alluding to, Caroline, is in our security policy manager. Let's ignore the tech for the moment, but our customers have need to exclude certain data from AI. It's not a universal rule that all the data that all our customers sit on can be accessible and churned through and processed by AI. Some of us customers have customers that block them, say, don't use AI in my content. And some of our customers deal with very, very hypersensitive information, the kind of materials that affect people's lives. This is not all about corporate documents and corporate documentation. Our law firms have personal cases, etc. They deal with child protection services, etc. And that data is hypersensitive. It's that kind of data leaks into an AI engine or leaks into a public domain. It affects people's lives. It's not about affecting a big corporation. It affects people and individuals, etc. So managing and protecting that data in certain ways is really, 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 really important to our customers. And in many cases, they just don't want AI. They don't need AI near it. They don't want AI near it. And they just want to be able to say, with confidence, don't let a user accidentally run AI in this content. So what we're building in our iManage Security Policy Manager is the ability to basically set rules around certain types of matters or certain types of content or certain practice groups even, and say, just turn off the AI tools. against that content. And that will be a block from our own AI tooling, but it'll also be a block from the AI tooling of third parties, so the Harveys and Agoras, etc. So it won't allow them to get to that content as well. And that will also then write a purview policy. So if that content comes out,
yes, yeah,
and they try to upload it into Harvey, it won't be able to make sense of it, etc.
Yeah, sorry, I should have said SMP actually. And would that be the case if for our Rio Tinto type example, or any other MCP?
Yeah, so again, that's it's a good question actually. So one of the beauties of MCP is because it's coming in through the official sanctioned governed front door, it's coming through the APIs, it respects all that natively. So if that content is protected, it doesn't matter how you're trying to get to it through whatever service you're using, the protection is applied inside the platform, and it's blocking all these outer layers from accessing it. Because
I guess it's become even more with the interoperability, it's become more complex, hasn't it? With that type of data, you need something that just simply blocks it, regardless of the AI engine, because there may be something that you haven't thought of.
Yeah, and that, I mean, sometimes that's why customers sometimes are like, why can't you just open up a mapped network drive to our cloud? And it's because that's not secure, right? We have to come through this to make sure anything, the security and the policy and things in play are all respected. Why can't you have an FTP service to just download all your data? Because we need security, and there's very complex security in all of our customers. It's not just can you see it, can't you see it? There's lots of different rules, there's lots of conflicts, and we have to make sure that's all respected inside the platform and anything else coming into the platform. Okay,
cool. Okay, you've got 2 minutes. So we said that we would talk about that it's all not just challenges. And is there any other positive? Was it really? We've talked about Rio Tinto. Are there any other really positive cases that you would like to end on in terms of use cases, or where we should end on a high note?
I mean, I think the word is here is the opportunity. Go back to that kind of intro. It's opportunity, right? And I think the opportunity, we represent corporate legal customers and law firm customers.
Yeah.
And the corporate legals see this as a way of not taking work away from the law firms, but the corporate legals are trying to answer problems that they could just never get to before. And they could have outsourced those problems to law firms historically, but the problem wasn't necessarily justification or big enough to justify the legal services bill in it. So for corporate legals, it's enabling them to answer questions and reach areas that they could never get to before. That's one of the great things. And in some regards, some of the law firms probably sitting there going, well, this is going to take work away from us. If the corporate legals are able to do much more themselves, and I'll say from talking to my corporate legal customers, a lot of them have no desire to do a lot of this work themselves. They quite like being able to hand this off to a third party. The value on the law firm side, and I think one that's not necessarily been truly leveraged yet, is kind of shortening the time of law, and being able to kind of foresee a problem as it happens, because you are sat already on much of your client's data, and being able to see those problems that are just about to affect your client because it's enshrined in their agreements, etc. Take the tariffs, Trump's tariffs in America, for example. If the law firms can proactively be mining all the agreements that they're sat on behalf of their clients, and they're able to kind of almost understand the tariffs, apply it to that data. And so when currently the client has to come knocking and say, hey, tell me what my problems and my exposures are of the tariffs. Actually, they can go, hey, you've got a problem with your tariffs, or you've got an opportunity in your tariffs.
Yeah.
And taking that kind of proactive services route, being able to offer the service before sometimes the client even knows they've got a problem, or they should be even be asking the question. And as I say, there's opportunity. It's not all just about problems and risks, etc. Sometimes hey, you can make some money out of this. There's opportunity. So we're at time and 1 minute over. Sorry, Caroline.
No, well, look, that's amazing. Thank you, and thanks to people for listening in. It's a big topic. I think we did pretty well in covering pretty much everything that I'd hoped that we would cover. So thank you so much, Paul, for chatting to me. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Alex, for jumping in. And yeah, it's been a pleasure, and I feel like these conversations are so helpful. This is such an important area, so I appreciate you making the time. Pleasure as always, Caroline. Thank you for everyone for giving us the time. Thank you. Okay, thank you.